It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to speak in front of you, and I hope that this will be a mutually constructive discussion. When I received Mike's invitation, I have to admit that it was quite challenging. That's why I have put in the title kind of a hidden question mark, what may lie ahead in the future for the marine surveyors. And this is the way that I try to approach the issue in order to make it more interesting to you. Now, I have dealt with the prospect of unmanned commercial vessels because still this is a technical project and we have not seen anything real being floating at the sea, although we have seen much smaller structures beyond the 500 gross tonnage regulatory requirement. But it seems from the industry, especially from the industry that develops this technology in terms of navigation, that there will be a future prospect to materialize within 15 to 20 years. So in that context, I'm trying to walk a legal solution how these kind of structures being unmanned can be accommodated in the current legislative and regulatory framework. Now, unmanned navigation will constitute most probably the next fundamental change in the historical industry of shipping, if that will eventually happen. I come from a traditionally maritime family, so I know how emotionally intertwined can be the human element with shipping. But from a legal perspective, I cannot see any problem to remove the human element from a ship and navigation if that element does not, in view of technological advancements, required to support the shipping function. So for me, that will be the conceptual threshold in order to accept, in principle, unmanned navigation. Now, we have seen so far the use of unmanned technology quite extensively in certain areas, though. For example, I'm sure that yourselves, as marine surveyors, you might have already used unmanned submersible vessels, remotely operated vessels, in order to conduct a survey of offshore structure, in order to see what lies at the hull and to monitor and document it. But speaking about an unmanned vessel itself, it's quite a different thing, and especially what is a dimension that will change altogether that discussion will be that this technology will be in the service of commercial navigation, which means that we do not discuss this project anymore in terms of a technical project. It's not an experiment to see whether or not that will work out, but we need to convince also the economic and financial interest, which is the ship owners and the cargo interests. Otherwise, this technical project will not turn around the investment. Now, in that process, we need to consider the prospect of unmanned commercial vessels within, first and foremost, the regulatory and international legal framework. Because at the same time that we have the technology to develop, there is also kind of an implied pressure upon the lawyers and the international lawyers at first hand to keep this prospect within the existing legal and regulatory framework. So the instruction that we receive from academia, from law offices, from the industry, is to explore whether or not that kind of accommodation of the technology can happen within the existing framework with minimal change, because we could do that easily in the future by having a special protocol through IMO and have a clean-cut prospect, but this may not happen, or it might take, by having the experience of how things work in IMO, to be a matter of 2 or 3 decades. So this is the background of the question that I would like to explore today. Now, how I will do it is to consider what is unmanned navigation in that context. One of these questions will be whether or not an unmanned vessel is still a ship within the strict legal meaning. For example, Costa Concordia at the time of grounding could be typically unmanned because nobody with authority was in charge of the vessel. Now, this is kind of the analogy of how we can consider unmanned vessels within the existing legal meaning. And ships are, in legal language, a concept abstract, but also very concrete by looking at the case law that dates back a lot of centuries. For example, an anecdote with regards to the description of ships is in an English case back to the 16th century, where the council responded to the judge that, in order to describe a ship, it feels like an elephant. You can tell one when you see it, but when it comes to strictly define it, it's very difficult. Now, will that development, the future prospect of having unmanned commercial vessels, affect you as a professional brand immediately? I will consider that element in the normal process of registration, because a vessel, manned or not, in order to acquire the right to navigation, which means that it will have the right to go beyond the national zone of the flag state, will need to acquire in international law the freedom to navigate freely at the high seas. And since we are speaking about a commercial vessel, it will need, without any impediment, to go through other foreign national jurisdictions and eventually to reach a port. Because if you Google at the moment unmanned commercial vessels, you will see a plethora of nice images, even 3D videos, but these do not exist. So the question is that these vessels, in order to make back the money, they will need eventually to put in a commercial service. So in the context of a vessel being manned or unmanned, it will need to be registered, and this is probably the first point of contact with your expertise, because in order to be registered, for example in the UK, it will need to be assigned to a class, and then through the formal process of a marine survey and auditing, it will be assigned to a class, and then it will become registered, receive a flag, and carry the purpose that has been designed. Now, this will be mainly my approach by dealing with 4 things. What is unmanned navigation? I will give you an idea of how the future will look. What is the current requirement for a proper navigation? Because the most important characteristic of that process will be not to have any tremendous changes in the existing legislation. For example, if you are being presented tomorrow, let's say, with an unmanned vessel, you will not be asked, most probably, to make a decision whether or not that vessel is a ship. Most probably you will be requested to assign that structure into a class, but not to deal with the question of whether or not that is legally a ship. Then I will consider what is a ship, just briefly. And then I will go to break up this process by considering the registration and classification process through the existing standards. We will consider also as an example SOLAS, how the requirements, the basic requirements of SOLAS in terms of principle would apply or what will need to be changed. And then to give you an idea of the ongoing process, because when I put the question what might lie ahead for the marine surveyors, I become really vividly aware that classification societies has already started to have input into that process, but in relation to a different subject. Unmanned vessels that are lighter than 500 gross tonnage, so we do not actually discuss about the prospect of unmanned commercial vessels proper, a tanker or a cargo. Now, according to MUNIN, a program that has been substantively and substantially founded by the European Union, this is the technology environment that an unmanned vessel will find itself in. It will be only a small part of a more extensive network of unmanned maritime system. Now, what is the projection of having an unmanned commercial maritime vessel? According to the Rolls-Royce, which represents one of the major players in the industry and is dealing at the moment with developing the technology, they consider that until 2035 we will have the first such vessel to be in commercial employment. So it's not the near future, but at the same time it's not that of a distant one. Now, during our discussions today, I will not make a distinction when referring to such vessels, but I would like at this point to make that distinction known. When we are referring to unmanned maritime vessels, normally we keep mixing two prospects. The one, it's vessels that are remotely controlled, and the eventuality that the industry will like to achieve at some point, it will be to have a 5 point in the scale of unmanned vessels, a 0.5 vessel, which means totally autonomous. Now, what's the difference is that remotely controlled vessels are more likely to become acceptable by the existing legal and regulatory framework because the human element still exists within the loop of the navigation. It's not physically present on board, but it might be on shore through a hyper-tech electronic bridge. But when you're referring to the future eventuality of having an autonomous vessel, you refer to a situation that you have removed totally the human element and you deal with the software. So the software has been pre-programmed in order to carry out a specific function to take the vessel from port to port. Now, I will not make that distinction through our discussion today because it's not been proposed that by 2035 we will have an autonomous vessel to be engaged in an international voyage. So that remains a bit of a future scenario for the time being. Now, one of the leading persons in unmanned commercial navigation, Oscar Levanter from the Rolls-Royce, gave a presentation earlier this year and considered that the technology is not anymore the obstacle in that kind of process. Rather, international law and regulatory framework will become the main concerns. And this is the reason why I have been dealing with that issues a couple of years now. Now, An unmanned vessel, in many respects, it will be a proper vessel, in the sense that the only material difference, it will be that the vessel is not being navigated by a person on board. So in that sense, it will enjoy, or should enjoy, or people like me are entrusted with the task to have these rights also enjoyed by these vessels, should enjoy exactly the same freedoms and rights, also responsibilities, under the current legal framework. And you might have you might be aware of the main framework in that respect, which is the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea. It's a very extensive document. I will not refer to the convention by article, except only Article 94, which lays out the duties of the flag state. Now, the Law of the Sea Convention, in short, it's a constitution kind of for the international law of the sea and the navigation. It's the document that lays down the specific freedoms and obligations of states in relation to the sea. One of the functions of states in that context is navigation, and as a document is interlinked with other more specialized documents that you have worked with throughout your career, like MARPOL, SOLAS, the Collision Regulation Convention, STWC, now the Maritime Labour Convention, and so on. Now, what complicates the things further, as I said, is that it's not enough to have a solution within a sole national order, because these vessels are proposed to engage in international voyages, which means that a legal solution and regulatory solution must be achieved at the highest possible level in order to accommodate these vessels in international jurisdictions. And since we are speaking about commercial vessels, we will expect that these vessels will go through the territorial sea, the exclusive economic zone, and the high seas. So in that sense, they will be able to perform without any obstacle from coastal or other foreign jurisdictions, navigation through the territorial sea up to 12 nautical miles, through the exclusive economic zone, and eventually to be able to have the right to enter into a foreign port. Now, this is a very critical issue, because so far, although we have in presence an extensive use of unmanned maritime vessels, these kind of vessels have not been employed in foreign jurisdictions. They are mainly used for scientific purposes within the coastal waters, or in more specific cases, they have been employed by the military for defense purposes, but the material difference is that military vessels are immune from foreign jurisdictions. So when we are discussing the prospect of unmanned commercial vessels, these kind of considerations will feature really high in the agenda. Now, coming close to the process of registration, and in that context also with the classification. The United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea delineates through specific provisions that process. For example, the vessel, regardless of being unmanned or manned, this is something that has not been clarified in 1982 when the convention was adopted, and I will come back to that issue later on. A vessel enjoys the right of navigation. The vessel acquires a nationality, and by means and in virtue of that nationality acquires the right of navigation. The nationality of the vessel, which in legal terms defines the status of the vessel will be the main issue for the registration of the vessel, and through the registration and classification we have not only the rights but also the duties of the flag state. Now, looking more closely to one of the provisions regarding the nationality of the vessel, you will see that the law applicable on that vessel will be a matter of national law. So the coastal state that will be able to register the vessel shall be also responsible to fix the conditions for the registration of the vessel, and subsequently also to designate the classification process. Now, why that is important? Because what can constitute in legal terms a ship will be prima facie from a first reading a matter for a national jurisdiction, a state, but this is not enough. So let's leave that aside. Why? What is another reason to make that important? Because the national jurisdiction, the national law, will define exactly what are issues like the registration process, the duty of care, and the due regard principle. So, in other words, or to put it more generally, whether or not a coastal state, in allowing a vessel, in our case an unmanned vessel, to register, has paid the due regard requirement and the duty of care against all the other users of the sea, other vessels, by designating the appropriate classification standards or registration procedures. Now, as I said, the most important article in the context of the present discussion, it will be Article 94, and this is because it designates or highlights the technical requirement, and this is why it comes more close to you. So, through the process of assuming the nationality of a state, a vessel, the vessel also is being placed under obligations, and these obligations are being discharged by the flag state. Now, in terms of these duties, Article 94 refers to, among other, technical requirements, and a vessel being unmanned is actually a technical requirement. Now, what else Article 94 points to? It points to the requirement that a state, in order to register, to give the flag to a vessel, needs to maintain a registry. And this is the link with the technical requirements that will be applicable to that vessel. Also, in doing so, to assume jurisdiction over that vessel in all respects. More specifically, the flag state, which maintains a registry and through the registration assumes jurisdiction over the vessel against that vessel and all other jurisdiction, it will need to consider, among others, and I read, elements that have to do with the construction, equipment, and seaworthiness of ships. So, in other words, these are elements against which will hold accountable a flag state against all the others. Also, although the document dates back to the 1982, we have an occurrence of a very important phrase that people like me try to go around, and refer also to the manning of ships, labor conditions, and the training of crews, taking into account the applicable international instruments. So, here the problem that we are faced as lawyers is whether or not, a vessel needs actually to be manned in order to be considered as a vessel within the meaning of UNCLOS, the Law of the Sea Convention, which ergo leads us to the conclusion that that vessel can acquire the right of international navigation. So this is the train of thought. Now, if we consider that an unmanned vessel can be seen within the reading of UNCLOS convention, then it's very simple and easy. But if it's not, then it's very difficult to consider that as a vessel. Also important is a specific, another specific provision within Article 94, which actually provides that each ship before registration, and this is where actually you can see yourselves, that each ship before registration and thereafter at appropriate intervals is surveyed by a qualified surveyor of ships and has on board such arts, nautical publication, navigational equipment and instruments as are appropriate for the safe navigation of the ship. Now here it will be the meeting point, whether or not you will need to make a decision whether or not that is a ship, or merely you will be presented with a structure that you need to make sure that it's seaworthy. This is why also the prospect of unmanned commercial vessels will be most probably, according to my personal opinion, preceded by another major question to be dealt by the states at the highest national level, whether or not they will allow these vessels to be considered as ships within their national legislation. Now, that is one of the pictures of how, for example, Rolls-Royce has envisaged the presence of unmanned vessels. I don't know if from your experience, you will raise an eyebrow when you will see that vessel, or it will make you to have a second thought. What I'm surveying is actually a ship. Now, what is a ship? It has been on purpose undefined within the major general conventions. So we do not have a definition what constitutes a ship. Instead, at the level of international legislation, we have developed a more tailor-made approach in order to consider that a specific type of vessel needs to abide by a legislation. So in order to make that legislation applicable on that vessel, we'll define the vessel as such. And I will show you a compilation of various definitions just to make, to see you the variety of definitions. Now, this was also a surprise to the people that lead the development of the technology when they told me in one of the conference, for example, in the International Symposium of Unmanned Navigation in Amsterdam, that according to the Colregs definition, which is a very wide definition, unmanned vessels can be considered ships. So they were under the impression that since the vessel that they're preparing meets the requirements of the Colregs definitions, then by definition is also, a ship. But it doesn't work like that in law. Why you have a very broad definition which actually covers everything in Colregs, also, offshore installations not fixed, is actually to make Colregs applicable to all such structures and not the other way around, not to define a ship. Actually, we had in 1986 a convention about the registration of vessels which contained a very helpful definition which could be used and take us out of trouble, but this convention, for reasons that have to do with the genuine link, for example, the offshore registration to flags of convenience states, has not entered into force, therefore it's not applicable and we cannot use it with authority. Now, this is a compilation. If you could see, I'm sure you are familiar with many of the instruments and the definitions, but you can see the point of the slide is actually to show you that we do not have a unified definition, but we have many definitions for practical purposes. Now, what will be the matter of the definition, to whom it will be the responsibility? It will be to the flag states, the national jurisdictions. But this so far has worked well with the much smaller structures, those that do not cross international jurisdictions. But if we need actually, to see seriously the prospect of unmanned commercial vessels, these vessels will need to go without any problem also to foreign jurisdictions. In other words, what counts to be a ship for UK, for a British registered vessel, it will need to be also a ship for the French or the Belgian or the Japanese jurisdiction. Otherwise, a ship owner will not be interested in investing in that kind of ships. Sorry. Right. Now, just to give you an idea of the divergent definitions over the legal meaning of ships. You can see, for example, the Belgian definition, which does not present any problem because they have defined legally a ship in a very broad terms. You can see the British approach, which is which is a bit more restrictive in the sense that it has a condition that a ship should be used in international navigation. For example, we have, just to give you an example, case law that could consider a jet ski to be a ship, but not to be in the employment of international navigation, but for recreational purposes. The paradox here is that by applying the same kind of legal thinking, a super yacht could not be either considered as a ship, one of the perplexities of the law, or you might consider a light ship. A light ship, I think it will look to the eyes of all of us as a ship. But a light ship is not being considered to be a ship within the legal meaning because it's not, used in international navigation. And for example, the French legislation, it's much more restrictive and problematic for our discussion today because it refers actually to any floating craft built and manned. So, for example, according to the French legislation, an unmanned vessel will not be considered within the legal meaning of a ship, unless you plasmatically, which is the legal fiction, you consider, and this is one of the existing arguments, that the master is not within the bridge on board, but he is sitting on an onshore electronic and high-tech bridge. Now, let's assume that for a specific jurisdiction like the British one or the Brussels jurisdiction, and in order to, if you allow me to open a parenthesis, Belgium is actually at the moment during the process to amend their legislation in order to allow unmanned vessels within the Belgian jurisdiction. So let's assume that it's a ship. That ship will need to be registered. So this is where we will need actually to consider the classification process. Now, any seagoing vessels will be registered, and doing so, it will be assigned to a specific class. And this classification, the practical purpose, is actually to define what type of permitted use can do, what is the certification attached to that vessel, and how and at what intervals it will be surveyed. And these kind of functions will be undertaken by a recognized classification society against which the state will be accountable for the other states. Now, in terms of merchant ships, because we are discussing about the prospect of unmanned merchant commercial vessels, there is no at the moment any kind of description in the current process that will rule out immediately the prospect of unmanned vessels, because the vessels will be classified or will be categorized in relation to the cargo that they carry, in relation to the gross tonnage, and the voyages that they are going to undertake, inshore, short international or extensive international. Now, this is the most important certification that are being, vessels are being required to have in terms of international regulations. I'm sure that you are familiar with all of these. You will not see in terms of marine surveying any of these certifications to raise any important issue in relation to unmanned vessels. For example, an auditor will need to deal with the manning certificate. So, for example, whether or not the MLC, the Maritime Labour Convention, will be applicable also to the people that operate remotely the vessel. But in terms of, you know, the work of a marine surveyor regarding, for example, you know, the stability or, you know, the integrity or the consistency of the hull, it will not actually change something immediately, because the only changing element is that of unmanned navigation. But just to give you an idea of possible problems, if you have a vessel that does not require crew, it will probably mean that this vessel will need to be constructed by materials that they do not require frequent maintenance. So the use or the existence of that materials at the moment, do they exist in order to make a vessel seaworthy? So this could be one of the questions, technical questions that may arise in the future in that context. Now, by looking at the purpose of registration and classifications, we can see that the marine surveyors and the classification societies will have actually the opportunity to have input in that kind of prospect before they are being requested actually to carry out a surveillance. And towards the end of my presentation, very shortly, I will show you the players that are involved at the moment in that process. Now, you will have class rules against those that vessels are being required. These will be the rules that have been developed by the classification society, also the rules that are being required as a statutory requirements by the legislation, for example, you know, the SOLAS requirements. But these rules may not cover issues that are which are closer to the issue of unmanned navigation. For example, they may not cover design to manufacture process, or the number and qualification of crew or operating personnel. Just note, you know, the distinction, or, you know, the conjunctive use of all, not only the crew but operating personnel, which means that operating personnel can be considered the onshore personnel. Or issues like, for example, the maneuvering performance, which might be another issue that you will need to consider. For example, if we are speaking about not a remote controller, but an autonomous software, if we ever reach 0.5 of the scale of unmanned vessels, will be up to you to consider whether the software has the capability to undertake specific maneuvering operations. And that will not be anymore, you know, a matter of hardware, but it will be a matter of software. So will be the future marine surveyor able to deal also with that kind of aspect? Now, let's now consider, you know, all of these issues within an example. For example, SOLAS. SOLAS lays down specific statutory requirements that marine surveyors will need to check the vessel against in order to make sure that it's properly registered in a national jurisdiction, is interlinked with UNCLOS through Article 94, because UNCLOS cross-refer to SOLAS through Article 94 regarding technical requirements, and it sets out specific statutory requirements, for example, aspects of design and its structural integrity, load line stability. None of these issues actually, apart from the steering element in the context that I referred to previously, might affect you immediately. However, SOLAS contains also, and this is one of the many conventions, so the possibility that we have in compliance of that technology with SOLAS does not mean that we will have a very easy compliance with other legislation. So SOLAS in Article 2 defines a ship very broadly, so we do not have a specific definition that's generally accepted. In content and restriction, you have the different chapters of SOLAS to which define specifically types of vessels. It requires states to register vessels in order for them to acquire the right to navigation. Vessels beyond 500 gross tons. We do not have any specific definition for ships. You have the possibility through specific chapters, and I do gather that, you know, a part of the slide might have gained your interest, so I will be happy to let me know what was that. It contains possible exceptions which apply to the accommodation of novel features, and what is more important, and SOLAS is a starting point for that kind of argument, is that allows for the equivalence principle. And this is actually a motto now for the industry that develops unmanned vessels, to say that unmanned navigation is the same as manned or better. And this is actually it's the substance of the equivalence principle. Now, the application of that principle in terms of technical characteristics, it will fall upon to you to see whether or not, you know, the alternative designs or materials or arrangements upon the vessel in order to accommodate that technology can serve the same well or better. And also you have an important provision in SOLAS Chapter 2.1, Regulation 3.1, regarding actually the possibility for the classification societies to apply also, in addition to the SOLAS statutory requirements, their own classification rules, which might be stricter than the statutory requirements. And this is why, in terms of commercial vessels, these vessels will need to be insured. So the insurer needs actually to make sure that these are seaworthy, which raises another aspect which I didn't want to mention because of the negative connotation, but I will put it in very sweet terms: the liability of classification society in making a decision for a vessel. Yes, I have only 2 or 3 slides that can go through them very quickly. Now, what is this? Is the last part, the ongoing process. Now, we have already a process that features many players. For example, the Safety and Regulations for European Unmanned Maritime Systems, a group that is being founded by the European Union in order to consider unmanned maritime systems, works in Brussels already and has identified many concerns, and the ultimate goal of that group is actually to deal and address with these concerns. Okay, one of these, the most important, is actually, you know, the lack of defined responsibility at many levels, at the level of state, at the level of the classification society, or the ship owner. Also, to what extent this kind of vessel will be considered, as I spoke before, within the meaning of the international convention. In other words, whether or not we will need actually to make a new SOLAS, a new MARPOL, a new load lines convention for these specific vessels, or we can see these vessels within the existing documents. Also, nationally speaking, we have a regulatory framework working group that works towards that direction, the Maritime Autonomous System Regulatory Working Group, which, as you can see, involves in that process many players. One of these players is also classification societies. So in that sense, many of you might have presented with that issue already, and definitely you will be presented before you are being called to survey such a vessel. Now, what are the most important issues at the moment? It has to do mainly, because we are speaking about navigation, with the compliance of that vessels with the collision avoidance regulations. But this is not the most important issue, because in terms of software, you might have, a software that allows that kind of ability. But in terms of having, a proper vessel, it might be more difficult than achieving a safe navigation. Issues of ownership, registration, and insurance are the most important, because these are portray the hesitance and the cautiousness of the industry, how you will register these under the Nobel registry, who will classify them, and already there is, for example, the DNVGL has developed rules, but these rules apply to small, remotely operated submersible vessels, not rules that will apply to vessels above the limit of 500 gross tonnages, and issues regarding the requirements, the professional requirements for additional training, accreditation, and certification. Not only the master, the crew, but also to the technical experts who will be able to make a decision whether these vessels are seaworthy or not. So thank you. With that, I conclude my presentation.